Craig stared at himself in the bathroom mirror, trying to see if he could keep the emotion out of his face. It took a minute, but he achieved a calm look, just what he needed right now. This was going to be difficult. He leaned against the rim of the sink and stared at the porcelain beneath his face, looked at the small ring of dirt around the drain, the film covering the worn chrome. The shine was gone. Wow, what a metaphor. He sighed. He listened, hoping he could hear heavy footsteps down the hallway and then the sound of the front door closing. But he didn't. If he spent any more time in the bathroom, it would look like he was hiding. That couldn't be allowed to happen. Craig pulled himself together, took another look in the mirror, and decided that was close enough to what he needed. Now for the hard part. Craig opened the door, and with a slight creak of the top hinge, the muffled murmur of voices from the bedroom a short distance down the hallway ceased. He walked through the door, down the hallway, down the stairs, and into the kitchen, loudly. There he pulled 2 mugs from the cupboard, a plain white one for himself and Ronnie's favorite, a clay one, turned on the coffee maker, got out hazelnut butter and milk. Anyway, it wouldn't last long. He made a few more preparations, just in case. One was to make a phone call, then preloaded a document onto his tablet lying in the living room. He was sitting at the bar in the kitchen sipping coffee when Roni appeared through the archway wearing one of her new blouses, showing off all her new cleavage. She was wearing her new blue jeans, very tight, which she used to show off her new ass. She wore glasses, which was a rarity these days, as she used her new contact lenses a lot. She stood in the archway, looking at Craig and tucking a strand of dyed blonde hair out of her face behind her ear. The expression on her face expressed submission. Craig gestured to the coffee in her mug on the other side of him on the bar, indicating that he wanted her to sit down with him. Shaking her head slightly, with sad eyes, she took 2 steps to the bar and sat down. "So," Ronnie began, looking down at her mug. Craig sat in silence. After a few seconds, Ronnie looked up at him, hoping he would say something first. Craig stared at her in silence, as before. "What now?" Ronnie asked, straightening in her chair and realizing that she'd slumped a little. "Now?" Craig asked aloud, his voice calm and steady. "Well, I think it's over, don't you?" Ronnie slowly closed her eyes and sighed. "I don't want it to be like this," Ronnie said to her husband. Craig pronounced. "I can't imagine you don't want it to be. But after today, after everything you've done, I'm not even mad anymore, Ronnie. I'm just tired." She looked down at her mug, at the bulges of her newly lifted breasts. She reached out with both hands and cupped them around the top of the mug, feeling the soothing warmth. Craig had even added her favorite cream. She could see and smell it. It didn't have to be the end. "I guess I was a bitch," Ronnie said. Craig snorted in agreement. "But we can get through this." Craig stared at Ronnie in silence, fingertips tapping the sides of his mug. "Are you still going to be a bitch?" Craig asked after a long pause. Ronnie wasn't used to being at a disadvantage to her husband. He had never spoken to her in that tone of voice. The question gave her a slight shock. "It's a rhetorical question," Craig said, as Ronnie prepared to answer. After something like that, Craig nodded toward their bedroom. No chance. Ronnie sighed, trying to find a way to make Craig understand. "It doesn't mean anything," Ronnie tried to justify herself. "I don't feel anything for him. It's just for sex." "I disagree," Craig stated, taking a small sip of his coffee. Ronnie reached across the table to touch her husband's hand around the mug. "Don't touch me," Craig growled at her. Ronnie froze. "I don't want your twisted and depraved flesh touching mine anymore," Craig told her, managing to get his emotions under control. Almost. Ronnie didn't know how to react to that. She jerked her hand away and took up her mug again, stared at Craig with a pained look on her face, unable to understand why this man, her very intelligent, loving, patient husband, who had given her so much, Would reject her like this? He had never said anything like this before. She thought he liked the changes she had made in herself. "I shouldn't have agreed to this," Craig said, running his eyes carefully over his wife, the part of her visible above the bar. "That's when it all went down." "Honey, we did it to make me feel better," Ronnie reminded him. "Oh, I guess that's where it all started." There was anger in Craig's voice, and although his gaze was steady, his voice wasn't. He was having a hard time keeping it all together. The liposuction, the elevator, then the first augmentation, then dental work, second breast surgery, just to make it look more lush. Nose job. All of it. Yes, at first it was to make you feel better about yourself. Ronnie tried to answer something, but Craig interrupted her. After the first breast augmentation, it was about making yourself as sexy as possible. Ronnie stood up so fast that the bar stool toppled over. "What's wrong with that? I've never been sexy." Craig started to gaining air in his lungs to say something, but Ronnie was on a roll, partly out of guilt, partly out of a need to go on the offensive, and partly out of fear. "I've always been just plain habitual Veronica," Ronnie accused. "The average Veronica. No one looked at me. No one noticed me. Oh, yes, I was smart and good at school, but no one wanted me. Nobody wanted me. That depressed me, Craig. So yeah, when I got the chance, I fixed that." Craig snorted. "I'm sexy now. Men want me." Ronnie jabbed her finger at Craig, who was sitting at the kitchen counter watching her. "I have big breasts. I have an ass. I've got hair. My nose is fixed. No one looks past me anymore. You just can't get over it." Craig looked at his wife with a chuckle. Ronnie wasn't interested in that. "Your fragile little ego can't handle the fact that I took my problem in hand, made myself what men want, and you saw it as a threat," Ronnie accused, her volume rising. "You can't handle being married to all of this." Ronnie ran her hands down the sides of her breasts, down her waist, down her thighs, as long as there were enough hands. Then she lifted her hands and ran them through her long blonde hair, simultaneously jutting out her breasts and swaying her hips. She had practiced this movement and pose endlessly. "You're small, Craig," Ronnie spat out to her husband and changed her pose. "And you can't handle what I am now. You'd want me to be just Veronica living in our tiny house, driving our old cars, just living." Ronnie spewed at her husband, feeling more and more in control of the situation each time. "Well, I got my breasts done, and I didn't refuse to improve further," Ronnie justified herself. "I had the fat folds at my waist sucked off, and I got a bonus at that expense. I got a nose job and a new client. The sexier I get, the more I get, Craig." Ronnie put her hands on her hips and looked intently at her husband. He stared back, meeting her gaze, and didn't flinch. "You men are so simple," Ronnie jabbed. "You think with your one mind, and I use it. See those breasts?" Ronnie moved forward again. "These breasts, which you loved so much, brought me a bonus of 5,000, and they're going to bring me more." Ronnie grabbed a strand of her hair. "This hair that used to be black?" Ronnie pointed at the lock with her other hand. "You men react to blondes. I did that, and men started looking at me askew." Ronnie turned around and held her ass out towards Craig. "That ass? Men stumble over trying to get a good look at me as I walk past them." Ronnie turned to face her unimpressed husband again. "And all this?" Ronnie gestured at herself. "Thanks to him, I got the regional manager through my bed. I'll get the next promotion too, Craig." "It's all an investment, asshole," Ronnie shouted. "An investment in me, in us, in our future." "Sure, I'm taking advantage of how stupid men can be, but I'm sick of being overlooked, of being bypassed. If you can't handle it, walk away. And if you can, get over it." "Should I leave?" Craig asked, his tone flat, normal volume, a slight smile playing on his face. "If you're so weak you can't handle it, then yeah, get the fuck out," shouted Ronnie. "When you come back, maybe I'll let you try again, but you'll have to change your attitude. No, said Craig, picking up his cup and taking a sip. No, yelled Ronnie. No? No, Craig confirmed. Ronnie walked over to the bar and leaned on it, trying to look threatening to her husband. Then if you're staying, you'd better follow the program, you asshole, she said to him. I'm not going to put up with this shit. Seriously, Craig, if you can't put up with it, get the hell out. No, Craig said again, his voice flat. You stupid shit. Spat out at him. Ronnie spat out at him. Well, finally. This is how it works. That's what I'm doing. Still no, Craig said, taking another sip. Ronnie's eyes widened, foam appearing at the corner of his mouth. Fuck you and your no, Ronnie said to Craig. That's how right I am. I'm going to go back upstairs and sleep with that guy in our bedroom. He'll promote me again for it. I'll make another 15 grand a year. I'll have more clients and more bonuses. Craig shook his head, pretending he didn't care anymore. In truth, he did. He had been depressed at the beginning of the conversation, but now he was determined. You can't stop me, Craig. Ronnie was angered by his nonverbal denial. If you want to be with me, you'd better find out how things are going to go from here. No, I don't want to be with you anymore, Ronnie, Craig said, setting down his mug. Not anymore, it's over. I've got something to say about that, Ronnie spat out. Not really, Craig said confidently. Here, let me prove something to you. Craig sat up, took a breath, and then suddenly shouted, Hey, you, in my bedroom, Vice President, you're trespassing. Get out of my house. No, he's not leaving. Ronnie pointed her finger at Craig. He will, Craig said, putting his elbows back on the countertop. Stay there, Eric, shouted Ronnie toward the bedroom. Craig took his mug with both hands again. Ronnie stared at Craig for a few seconds, not thinking straight. Then, after a few breaths, she had her thoughts again. Craig, it doesn't have to be like this, Ronnie said angrily to her husband. I know. Look, I know what I've done to you is wrong. I know it hurts you. I wish you didn't have to see this. Ronnie waved her hand uncertainly toward the bedroom, but this is what I need to move up. You men react to sex. You should know that. Craig nodded sideways, showing he understood, but also looked as if he couldn't deny the fact. I feel good, honey. I really do. I'm not being ignored anymore. If I can make myself feel better and succeed, why not? Ronnie reasoned. Why can't I do that? Well, probably because you were my wife, said Craig simply. I am your wife now. Ronnie attacked him. I don't feel anything for this guy. He's just a dick who can give me something. No, that's not it. Not really. But now I've decided to stop being patient with you, Craig said, sitting back down and starting to gesticulate as he spoke. I know what you mean about being overlooked. I am not a significant person. I would describe myself as average. Craig ventured. Some teams that hurts. I agree with you. Ronnie crossed her arms over her chest, deciding to let Craig speak. I paid for the first liposuction. I paid for the second one. I paid for those boobs. I paid for that haircut. I paid for that butt augmentation. All of that, Craig pointed casually at Ronnie's body, was paid for by me. And I did it because I loved you and trusted you. Even when you started to change, after your first breast augmentation, I didn't say anything because it was a big change for you. I knew things were changing and you were getting what you thought you needed. But my mistake was exactly that, in being patient with you. Craig looked thoughtful. You've gotten ugly, Ronnie. Ronnie snorted derisively. First there were those comments where you insulted your sister at Thanksgiving, Craig said. They were just dismissively rude. She's a lot like you used to be. You shouldn't have acted that way around her. Then, when your mom tried to talk to you, you blew her off. Oh, sure. You didn't bully your sister anymore that day, but you also ignored her and didn't apologize. That's her problem, Ronnie stated. No, this is a family problem, Craig ventured. You hurt your sister, you hurt your parents. And then you kept doing this to them. Have you noticed that they hardly talk to you anymore? Well, your brother uses some colorful epithets to describe you to me. I stopped defending you a long time ago when he uses them. Pfft, Ronnie disagreed. That was around the time you started teasing me in bed with your changes. Craig continued thoughtfully. Yeah, it was funny for a while, but then, after that, it didn't stop being teasing anymore, did it? Craig cast a questioning glance at Ronnie. After a while, you started trying to convince me that you were superior in some way. You liked that. It took me a while to realize that you started to enjoy humiliating me. Only in the bedroom, but yes, I did. So, Ronnie asked with a chuckle. And then you went after your old girlfriends, Craig remembered. Jules. You were terrible with her. She was your witness, remember? Ronnie only shrugged her shoulders. To hell with her if she can't see the obvious. Well, she did, Craig confirmed. That's why you're not friends anymore. Ronnie closed her eyes, took a deep breath in frustration, raised her eyebrows once, lowered them, and waited for Craig to continue. You've gotten worse and worse, Craig said, getting farther and farther away from Veronica, the woman I'd fallen in love with. Yes, she wasn't a model or a photo model, but she was loving, funny, smart, a little charmingly insecure, caring, compassionate, a terrible cook, a terrific friend, and my best friend. Ronnie looked at Craig with concern on her face. And you? Craig gestured at Ronnie with an open hand. You're just an evil plastic doll, which I don't like, and which I'm not going to put up with anymore. Then you can get the hell out of here? Ronnie spat, pointing at the front door. No, Craig said simply. A knock was heard from the other end of the house. Sorry, said Craig, standing up and walking out of the room. Now what? Ronnie asked irritably, rolling her eyes at the knocking on the door. The doorbell rang, and Ronnie heard Craig yell out, Coming! Ronnie leaned back to see who was behind the door when Craig opened it. Opening the door, Craig greeted two uniformed police officers, a man and a woman. Come in, letting the two wary policemen inside, who quickly spotted Ronnie through the doorway into the kitchen, the policewoman asked, Sir? Yeah, thanks for coming in, Craig said, pulling his wallet out of his pocket. He pulled out his driver's license and held it out to the policeman. Here's my license. I'm the sole owner of the house. I have a person upstairs in my bedroom trespassing on my property. Also, I think I need help escorting this woman over here off the property. Craig nodded toward Ronnie. Craig? Ronnie shouted, walking over to him. Upstairs? The female officer asked. Is he armed? What's wrong? Craig! Stop it! Yelled Ronnie. Officers, that's not true. Wait, Craig said, stepping around the officers and Ronnie. He entered the room and picked up his clipboard from the coffee table. Turning it on, he muttered, Wait, typing a copy of some document again. He walked back into the room and held out the tablet to the male officer. What is this? The officer asked, looking at the document. He looked it over, then looked at the driver's license. Handing the clipboard back, the officer said, Okay, you're the owner. What's going on here? Craig, Ronnie exclaimed, both angry and slightly frightened. She didn't like where this was going. It was out of her hands. I came home and found my wife in bed with her employer and they were engaged in lewd behavior, Craig explained. I told the guy he was trespassing on my property, but he's still here. I'd like him removed and I want to press charges. Craig! Ronnie exclaimed accusingly. The female officer muttered something about hating local challenges. Officers, this man was invited here by me, Ronnie explained, looking at her husband. He's not violating anyone's boundaries. Excuse me, ma'am, said the officer, trying not to look at the cleavage Ronnie was showing. But if any family member claims that an intruder is trespassing, according to the new city laws, that person must leave. If not, However, the officer shrugged. Did you inform him that he was not welcome here? The female officer asked. Yes, Craig said. Shouted it from the stairs. Didn't tell him in person. The door was locked as far as I know, and I didn't want to risk a face-to-face meeting. But I have the tape. Craig tapped his breast pocket, pointing to his cell phone. Craig, Ronnie hissed. Also, I'd like to have her... Craig nodded toward Ronnie. Escorted off the premises. I don't want her arrested, just removed. Was there any violence? The female officer asked, while the man was saying something into the walkie-talkie. She looked at Ronnie. What? No, said Ronnie. I didn't touch him. Ronnie pointed at Craig. I meant, did he hit you? Said the female officer, but I'm going to assume he didn't. Sir, can I ask you to show me where the bedroom is? The male officer asked. This is where my partner will stay with this woman. Sure, Craig replied as he walked past the two women. Ma'am, would you mind staying with me? The female officer asked, looking at Ronnie. But, began Ronnie, watching her husband and the officer walk up the stairs. This is all wrong. I'm sure it seems that way to you, ma'am, the officer replied. 10 minutes later, the male officer shouted, Let's go down! Along with two others went down the stairs. Turning the corner at the foot of the stairs, Chief Roney was in the lead. He was wearing his suit pants buttoned, but his fly and belt were unbuttoned. It was all he had on. His pale chest and unruly hair combined with angry eyes told the story of an unhappy man. He cast an angry glance at Ronnie as he walked past her and headed for the exit. A male officer followed him, one hand holding his jacket, shirt, tie, and shoes with socks inside, and with his other hand he held the handcuffs that were on his wrists behind Ronnie's boss's back. As he walked past, the male officer cast a glance at his partner and nodded. I'll let her pack her things, the female officer said to her partner. Craig stood back and watched what was happening. Craig, don't do this, Ronnie asked her husband after realizing what was happening. It's already done, Craig said sadly. I don't feel safe when you are here. You let strangers into the house when I am not around and you hide it from me. Your temper has changed a lot lately. You need to leave. Take your clothes and what you need, and we'll deal with the lawyers afterward. Craig said this mostly for the officer, in case he needed a witness in court with his cell. He thought that was a distinct possibility. Craig, no! Ronnie pleaded, holding out her hands. We can work this out. We've been trying to do this for a long time, Craig said, his eyes closed as the memories came over him. It didn't work out. It's all over. Sir, can we take some of her things? The female officer asked. Ronnie was stunned silent, realization coming over her like a plague. Sure, Craig said. She's got a car in her garage, a new BMW, not an old Subaru. She can use it. Nodding, the officer turned to Ronnie and said, Come on, honey. Let's get your things together. As Ronnie and the officer went upstairs, Craig pulled out his phone and stopped the recording. He didn't know how good the video would be, but he was sure the sound would be excellent. Standing still, he made sure the video was uploaded to the right place, and then sent copies to his attorney, Ronnie's family, and his family members. It didn't take long. He asked the lawyer to inform Ronnie's employers, but the lawyer advised him to hold off. It was better to have her employed in case the worst happened, and divorce was suddenly on the agenda, like now. Craig, no. We can work things out, Ronnie said as she came down the stairs and saw her soon-to-be ex-husband. I already tried, Craig said, tucking his phone back into his pocket and turning off the sound. Talked to you about the way you were acting, tried for months. At first you listened, and then you stopped. And then a couple weeks ago, after I saw you with your boss at a company party, I stopped too. Craig, please. I've told you this before, remember? Please, Craig said softly. Can you remember how many times? Come on. said the female officer, standing still and holding one of Ronnie's suitcases. Ronnie took hold of the handles of her suitcases and, with an incredibly lost look, headed with the officer towards the garage. Craig stood still for a while, waiting. It seemed to him that it wasn't over yet. When he heard the garage door open, the BMW drive in, and then the garage door close, he exhaled and felt the tension subside a little. He collapsed on the couch and sighed heavily, then cried for his wife, who he hoped would someday be able to break free from the person she'd turned into. The coffee in the kitchen on the bar counter had long since gone cold.